Welcome to the News Roundup for Monday, January 12, 2026. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, she's at it again, making inflammatory accusations against the Trump administration and outrageously claiming that none of their fraud-related searches in her home state, none of them have produced a single shred of evidence. You've got to hear this story. Frustrated politicians who've finally reached the breaking point with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, they're now openly calling for him to be led away in handcuffs. And radical left squad members are taking the fight to ICE and demanding that the agency be immediately abolished as they crank up their nasty and potentially dangerous attacks against federal law enforcement. Also, the new top Democrat on a congressional committee dealing with China receives thousands of dollars in donations from pro-communist sympathizers. And Hollywood A-listers at the Golden Globe ceremony are treated to a variety of real showstoppers, including a smidgen of bad behavior. All this and a bunch more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with Representative Ilhan Omar, who's now going on the offensive and outrageously claiming that there's no justification at all for the federal response to Minnesota's jaw-dropping fraud scandal. I guess the feds should just look the other way, maybe take a holiday and run down to Maui for a couple of weeks. Despite the fact that some estimates now peg the damage at more than $9 billion, and that most of the alleged fraudsters charged with related crimes are of Somali descent, Omar says the Trump administration's efforts to deal with the massive problems plaguing her state, they're completely unnecessary. She claims that instead of legitimately trying to deal with the issues in a responsible manner, federal agents are merely sowing fear, confusion, and chaos wherever they go, and basically making life miserable for everyone who lives there. Well, not exactly accurate. We'll get to that in just a bit. Now, taking it a step further, Omar says there's no reason at all for thousands of ICE agents to waste any more time conducting raids in Minneapolis because, according to her, none of the searches they've conducted so far have produced any sort of criminal activity at all. She goes on to argue that up till now, all 87 people who've been charged with fraud-related crimes in Minnesota were done so in a highly cooperative manner between state officials and the former Biden administration. Meanwhile, she claims the current Trump administration has not found enough evidence to charge a single person. Not yet, anyway. In a nutshell, Omar says the federal government is trying to rely on misdirection by using inflammatory rhetoric and cutting off her state's food stamp funding, claiming that it's all merely part of a highly orchestrated PR stunt, all designed to hurt her constituents. America, you decide, a PR stunt or trying to track down billions in fraud? She's also stepping way out on a limb and claiming that right now, in addition to arresting violent criminals, ICE agents are actively disappearing American citizens as well, thus threatening the U.S. democracy.
Oh, come on!
She's basically trying to say the sky is falling. Yeah, I kind of get that. Now, for their part, the Department of Homeland Security, they say that Omar's outrageous comments are part of a ridiculous lie which demonizes law enforcement, promotes violence against them, and makes their already challenging jobs that much more difficult. They also report that since they recently kicked off their Operation Metro Surge efforts in Minneapolis, their officers and agents have already arrested more than 1,500 illegal aliens in the area, including a large number of extremely violent criminals. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. And according to my little bucket of sunshine, that one, Ilhan Omar, a federal response to this monumental scandal is wholly unnecessary, which is her fancy way of saying, what's a lousy $9 billion between friends? Simply look the other way and pretend nothing ever happened. Actually, I kind of like that. Highly convenient. On the other hand, when that amount of taxpayer money goes missing, the feds have an obligation to investigate, determine who has broken any number of laws, conduct investigations, arrest guilty parties, conduct trials, and hold responsible those who got rich off the federal government. Her claims of confusion, chaos, intimidation, nothing more than a byproduct of those who have enabled all this fraud to take place, and to blame anybody else for all the drama. That's what they call Psychology 101, projection. A massive chunk of this fraud happened on her watch in her 5th district, and she wants you to think it's the feds who are the bad guys. Now, regarding her claim that ICE agents are creating terror in Minnesota, she's delusional. There are ICE agents in big cities all over the country with law enforcement duties to carry out, and if you've done nothing wrong, you'll experience absolutely no terror. By the way, because I don't want there to be any hard feelings between me and Ms. Omar, I'm leaving out the part where she recently became the proud new mom of $30 million. Because bringing that up at this particular juncture, it just wouldn't seem appropriate. And you can take that to the bank. We are going to stick now with Minnesota for just a bit longer and shift our focus to the crumbling regime of Governor Tim Walz, who appears to be desperately struggling to stay in office, as calls grow for him to be forcibly removed over his glaring failure to control fraud on his watch. Yeah, sleep at the wheel. Following a recent round of testimony by whistleblowers on Capitol Hill, Minnesota's highest-ranking Republican lawmaker, a guy called Tom Emmer, now says it's crystal clear that Walz still refuses to take any accountability whatsoever for what he's done. Furthermore, he says the governor hasn't held anyone else in his administration accountable either, that he's obviously a coward, and that he sincerely hopes Walz eventually leaves office in handcuffs because look what he's done. Yeah, truly criminal. A lot of folks are leaving us comments right here saying that exact same thing. Additionally, the congressman points to a recent press conference Walz gave as proof that the two-term governor is rapidly unraveling, becoming severely unglued, and spiraling totally out of control. And I'm just thinking out loud, but this would kind of make a pretty nifty movie. In case you missed it, at that presser, the grumpy governor told the crowd that despite dropping his re-election bid for a third term, he would only resign, quote, over my dead body, as in his dead body. I get that. In the meantime, the congressman says that Walz's behavior, his bizarre behavior, combined with his decision to withdraw from the race, leads him to believe that Minnesota's staggering fraud scandal is even worse than we currently believe it is, if you can imagine that. And Walz knows it. He also says that state Republicans have been trying to make people aware of what's been going on for years, that nobody in the Twin Cities media would ever report it. Maybe that's because the state's leading paper, we've talked about that before, it's run by a former member of the Walz administration, and that the House Oversight Committee has now officially invited Walz to appear on Capitol Hill and defend himself from charges that, instead of listening, he threatened to retaliate against very whistleblowers who desperately tried to alert him to what was going on and right under his nose. And like I said before, this has all the makings of a top-notch film. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Now, Brother Emmer makes a pretty good point, but here's the deal. Tim Walz is pretty much already in handcuffs. He's an ineffective, lame duck governor who has so horribly mismanaged the state of Minnesota that when his current term is up, yeah, he's finished. He won't be running for re-election. He'll be leaving his job in disgrace, and in time, under more appropriate leadership, Minnesota will hopefully be restored to greatness. With that, Editor Pranov the Magnificent, Cut 24, please. We will all be pushing for the MMGA movement, making Minnesota great again. You know, if this narcissistic failed governor and failed vice presidential candidate had even a drop of common sense, he'd resign from office immediately and spare his state any further trauma. About that trauma, and I suppose we have to be abundantly candid, on his watch, an estimated $9 billion. Yeah, you got to repeat that. $9 billion worth of fraud has been reported. Enormous investigations ongoing, a bunch of folks already in prison, and we think more arrests are forthcoming. It ain't pretty. By the way, if you're wondering why he refuses to immediately step down, just walk away, well, check it out, and here's the deal. We did some research. As governor, word is he scores a six-figure salary. The governor's mansion as well, all paid for. All the bills covered too. Gas, electricity, maintenance, and more. Also free transportation, security guards, top-notch health insurance. And we hear tell of a pretty nifty pension plan as well. Yeah, nice work if you can get it. And like they say, Minnesota governor job, go for the fraud and corruption, stay for the perks and the benefits. Our pivot now just a bit and turn our attention to a number of inflammatory comments which are currently being made by the radical far-left Democrats who like to call themselves the Squad, the Mod Squad. In a series of highly antagonistic remarks, both New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that one, and Massachusetts lawmaker, someone named Ayanna Pressley, they seem to be intentionally fanning the flames of public discontent and pouring gasoline on the fire of an already tense national political situation. For starters, Pressley is now calling for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to be completely abolished, saying the agency's actions are unconstitutional, unlawful, and just downright cruel. And years ago, the king, Elvis Presley, said, "Don't be cruel." However, she doesn't stop there. The progressive Democrat goes on to accuse ICE of being rogue, racist, and a bunch of terrorists as well, adding that they're a bunch of lawless, masked thugs who don't discriminate in their attacks and who sooner or later will come for everyone. Well, they better not be coming for me. I'm the News Roundup host. And I tell you, America, I won't go quietly. Furthermore, she goes on to argue that the agency is completely beyond redemption, that Americans don't feel any safer because of all the harm they're doing, and that, in essence, President Trump is nothing more than a dictator. I call those fighting words. And not to be outdone or left out of the conversation entirely, AOC, let's bring her up, chiming in as well. She says the recent tragic shooting of the mother of three, Renee Good, it was obviously an assassination on the streets of an ordinary American citizen, and that in her mind, it's completely unacceptable. And like I always say, when AOC is in the room, you don't need charges, arrests, trials, or judges. She's full service, and she does it all single-handedly. And it must be simply divine to be the queen of justice. Meanwhile, after shaking their heads in disbelief, the Trump administration now fighting back against the lefties and pointing out just how wrong they are. As the White House points out, ICE officers are now facing increased threats to their lives from these kind of dangerous and untrue smears being spread by elected Democrats, adding that anyone who points their finger, just like this, at the long arm of the law instead of at the criminals is basically doing the dirty work of the illegal aliens. Additionally, acting ICE Director Todd Lyons seems to have had about all he can take of these nauseating progressives as well. I'm with that guy. He says by looking at the video, you can clearly see that the officer had only milliseconds to make a critical life or death decision. He also says that many of the current attacks on ICE are due to these kinds of irresponsible remarks and that fewer agents would be out on the streets if more cities worked with them instead of against them. Yeah, it makes sense. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. By now, everyone knows that ICE is part of our nation's Department of Homeland Security, and they focus on smart immigration enforcement, humane detention, preventing terrorism, and combating the illegal movement of people and goods. Sounds reasonable to me. Therefore, according to Representative Presley, ICE is both racist and rogue, and the agency should be abolished. She's some brain surgeon, this one. Hey, be very careful and read between the lines with regard to anything this dangerous woman says. ICE agents, they're federal law enforcement. They're law enforcement officials, and part of their job is to make communities safer all over the country. Lying about them, vilifying them, and trying to turn people against them just makes everything more difficult, complicated, and dangerous for everyone. Abolishing ICE, nothing more than a cheap way for Presley and her cohorts to generate chaos, create a safe haven for illegal immigrants as well, compromise U.S. safety, and maybe even pad the vote. That's a perfect crime. And speaking of the vote for our friends in Massachusetts, the Honorable Miss Presley will be up for re-election in this year's midterms. And think about her mission, the chaos and the lawlessness she's trying to create when you cast your vote. You're going to have a choice, so please choose wisely. Change things up just a bit now. Take a look at some alarming allegations being made against a new top Democrat on the House committee whose main job is to limit the influence of Chinese Communist Party. Yeah, fun bunch of cats. So, a California congressman named Ro Khanna, I know that guy, has just been named as the #1 Democrat on the Critical Security Panel. And according to troubling reports, he's now being directly linked to thousands of dollars in donations, and all from pro-CCP businessmen. Now, to be fair, the Lawmaker has been highly critical of China in the past, calling it an authoritarian surveillance state rife with human rights violations. However, apparently that's where Khanna's criticism kind of ends and the hypocrisy sort of kicks in. Records show that Khanna has received sizable campaign contributions from a number of people who are either tied in some fashion to the Chinese Communist Party apparatus itself or who are actively engaged in trying to exert public influence on their behalf, including some Americans. When you add it all up, no matter how you slice it or dice it, positioning this guy near the top of a congressional committee whose main purpose is to fight Chinese influence here in the U.S. seems a bit like putting a fox in charge of a henhouse. Moving along, some additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom as we kick off a brand new week. First up, President Trump says Iran now desperately anxious to negotiate terms with the U.S. following his ominous threat to retaliate against the Islamic regime for their brutal and deadly crackdown against pro-democracy demonstrators, which has already killed hundreds and hundreds of people. Moving along, the commander-in-chief also aiming to alleviate concerns in Europe about both Greenland and the Russia-Ukraine war by claiming that NATO members have nothing to worry about because he personally saved the entire alliance. And a bit closer to home, 47 hinting that the multi-talented Secretary of State, that smiling cat right there, Marco Rubio, may soon add another job title to his resume, saying that if all goes according to plan, the former senator from Florida with Cuban roots might eventually wind up becoming the next president of Cuba. I kind of like that. And now a quick gander at the world of showbiz. It was a busy weekend. Kicking things off today with all you need to know about the most earth-shattering moments from this past weekend. Star-studded Golden Globe ceremony in Beverly Hills, California, right over yonder. In a nutshell, former child actor Macaulay Culkin brought the house down when he strolled out onto the stage for the first time in 35 years. Julia Roberts receiving a standing ovation when it was her turn to hand out the big prize, and Sean Penn stayed at his table all night long, secretly puffing away at a cigarette, a whole carton of cigarettes. He thought nobody else was looking, and apparently he was wrong because we all saw it. As for all the big winners, who really cares? It's not the Oscars, so in my mind, no big deal. But look, great to see Big Mac Macaulay Culkin at the big awards show, and he must have left the kids for the night home alone so he could have a night out and be kind of famous again with all the grown-ups. Of course, Julia Roberts got a standing ovation on account of, if you look around, she was the prettiest woman in the room. And Hollywood's bad boy, Sean Penn, he was there, doing his lame imitation of the Marlboro Man, chain smoking all night long. Guess he didn't see that big giant sign that reads, "No smoking." By the way, the news roundup is also a no smoking roundup, no smoking, no vaping, and no chewing tobacco allowed. That's just nasty. Sticking around Tinseltown just a bit longer, you know you're getting old when actor and comedian Adam Sandler receives a Career Achievement Award from the AARP, the Retired Folks Group. Happy Gilmore himself scoring the coveted prize this past weekend from his good pal Henry Winkler, the Fonz, at the group's Movies for Grown-Ups Award ceremony, saying that he's not done yet and he still plans to make another 50 movies before he dies. Also promising at least half of those movies are going to be good. Here's the deal. Rosie O'Donnell, she moved to Ireland when 47 was reelected. And if Adam Sandler makes 50 more movies, then I'm moving to Cuba on account of I don't like Adam Sandler movies. And in Cuba, I get to be Marco Rubio's new assistant president. It's kind of a win-win. And I've always wanted to be an island nation vice president. And finally, after floating like a butterfly, stinging like a bee for decades, that guy, legendary boxer Muhammad Ali, finally about to get his very own postage stamp. The former three-time heavyweight champ and cultural icon passed away in 2016 at the young age of 74, battling Parkinson's disease for, I think, close to 30 years. Congratulations are in order. A stamp for the champ. By the way, Ali's most legendary fight was with a real-life Hollywood movie star, and I saw that fight. A little help here from Editor Pranov. Pranov the Magnificent, if we have it, if you would please, roll clip number 38. I recall the evening well. Ali famously surprised Sylvester Stallone at the 1977 Academy Awards, interrupting him on stage to playfully claim that he was the real Apollo Creed, and that Stallone ripped off his life story for Rocky. And that led to a brief boxing match between the two legends, live and on network TV. The backstory, Stallone was presenting an award when Ali appeared behind him, and that led to a famous moment where they pretended to box it out before embracing and hugging it out. Rocky, by the way, was a massive hit, and the film would go on to win Best Picture that night. And the best of all time, Muhammad Ali. Total fights, 61, 56 wins, 37 by knockout, 5 losses, if I remember correctly. And I always remember correctly. And he'll always be the best that ever was. He was the champ. And now it's time to call it a wrap on the big news roundup. So have an awesome day today. Stay safe. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right over there. And with that, we're going to dim the lights. It's going to fade to black. And we'll see you right back here next time. Another new episode of the Big News Roundup.